Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Talking Elections and COVID-19. It's a new video series from the MIT Election Data and Science Lab. In each episode, we'll be featuring insights from election experts around the country on a particular topic. Here to introduce today's topic, as well as our VIP guests, is our Election Lab Director, Charles Stewart. Hi, Charles.
Hi, Claire, thanks. I'm really excited to welcome Amber McReynolds and Paul Gronke today to talk a little bit about voting at home, vote by mail. Amber is the executive director of the National Vote at Home Institute and formerly ran elections in Denver, Colorado. Paul Gronke is a professor of political science and is the director of the Early Voting Information Center at Reed College. And this is a great thrill to have both of them today. I'll start with Amber. Amber, you have a lot of experience in your professional life. When you were in Denver, moving the city and the state from some voting by mail to this vote at home model there. As somebody who has a lot of experience doing this and knowing that a lot of election officials are going to be somewhere in that continuum in the next few months, what are the one or two pitfalls, dangers, risks that people really need to be aware of, and maybe you wish you had been aware of when you got going?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me and inviting me to be a part of this. I think first and foremost, election, when you're thinking about more vote by mail, thinking about the systems that are in place to support that. So whether that's the scanning equipment for counting, or the inbound mail ballot processing equipment with ballot sorters and signature verification, all of those equipment needs really matter when it comes to an increase in volume. So, whether or not a state does all vote by mail or mails out ballots to everyone, or just sees an uptick like what we're seeing in Wisconsin right now, election officials have to be prepared to receive that increased volume. They also have to be prepared to mail out ballots for that increased volume. And so sort of those two things, the outbound and the inbound process, I think are really critical in thinking through how to actually scale up this type of model. And they're really key because on either side, if something doesn't go well, or you're not able to handle the volume, or you run out of envelopes, for instance, like what we've seen in a few Wisconsin jurisdictions, it can really hurt that process. So thinking about both those two aspects of it, and then scaling up in those areas is really important.
So you were known for running a really data-driven shop in Denver. You were known locally, you were known nationally. Can you talk about how the analysis of data helped to guide both your own management, but also help to guide the improvements in the system over time, and the important metrics that you followed?
Sure. We followed, like, as you mentioned, I was very data driven about all of this. So looking at every aspect of the process and what data points that we were collecting, what we were analyzing, and how we were modifying that over time. So over time, I mean, really Denver and Colorado are where they are today because of data. And the reason I say that is, electors, voters were asking for vote by mail ballots. We could see that over time. We could see those spikes in trends over time. So that was something that we were constantly monitoring. But then we also collected things like what, on any given day leading up to election day, how many of the electors percentage-wise were submitting their ballots, how many were coming in the door during every day of the 3-week period. And over time, we were able to actually get pretty good at predicting what we expected to receive based on prior elections. So we have a whole predictive model in terms of what the number of ballots that would come in on a given day, which enabled us to staff up. And we even got so predictive that we were able to determine hour by hour on election day. And we could shift people and bring people in at where we would expect to see the higher volume. And then similarly with a system like ballot trace or ballot tracking tools, you actually know what you're going to get from the post office before it gets there. So with those sorts of tools, you actually, as an election official, can see what's on the way to the office from the post office. And that is a great way to use data because you know exactly what you're going to receive, and then you can adjust your staffing. Similarly with the ballot tracking tool, by putting and being proactive with shipping data to the voter, telling voters where their ballot is in the process, whether or not it's been received by the election official, where it is in the postal stream, all of that data is actually really relevant for voters, because then they don't have to call your office and ask for that information. And then finally, one of the other key data points that we looked at, in addition to all the normal turnout, signature verification, cures, all of those pieces, we also looked at why voters called the office. And so part of the reason we developed the ballot tracking tool is because voters kept calling, asking if we had received their ballot or if the ballot was on the way to them. So, looking at those customer service calls, those touch points in the data from a data perspective, but then also all of the operational aspects of the data and how you can use that to better your operation. So those are a couple key points.
The last question, and it follows up on that. I mean, you mentioned a number of computer systems, web-based systems for interacting with voters. Thinking about November, and as jurisdictions are almost going from a standing start to something well beyond a standing start, most places are not going to develop sophisticated systems. But listening to you talk, it seems that there are some basic things, you can also almost call it blocking and tackling, that everybody running a quality mail system would be following. It might even just be just keeping track on a daily basis, requests and returns. But are there other metrics that you would say, these are the 3 or 4 things you really have to follow those things if you're an election official or if you're a state legislator who wants to understand what's going on?
Well, I think definitely right now, following the number of requests coming in, because I think that, even in other states, because I think, we can certainly see where there's been this giant uptick, especially in Wisconsin as of late. And I don't think that's going to slow down. I think those things are going to continue. So being proactive about monitoring that and, comparing back to the same time in 2016 or the same time period in 2018. And if you can see a significant spike that's 50, 60, 200%, whatever it might be, then you can give yourself a roadway to predict what you would expect to get by November. So I think modeling that now, and then also capturing how long does it take your staff to process that application and then prepare that ballot. If you're doing annually, how long does that entire transaction take and what does it cost? Because it may make more sense, especially if you're starting to see a big uptick in requests, to not manually mail out the ballots, but actually procure a vendor to help do that. And those are some of the things I think that counties right now need to be tracking, need to be looking at. Certainly list maintenance and address library and all of that is a whole nother discussion, but that is also very rich in data in terms of things that counties could be doing now.
Great. Thanks, Amber. I want to turn it over to Paul, and to think at a very high level, maybe 30,000 feet. Well, political science, election administration, election science. There's been a lot of interest in vote by mail, vote at home over the last couple of decades. Could you just kind of give us a rundown about what the literature tells us about major advantages and disadvantages, and how one thinks about framing what you're getting and what you're giving up when you're moving to an all mail or a greater, let's say, a greater mail environment?
Absolutely, Charles. And again, thanks for the opportunity. I do want to share one story about how I sort of first met Amber virtually. She may remember this. So she was still at Denver County at that time. I was skeptical about some of the ballot tracking systems I think she was first rolling out, because with any new system, when you first put it in place, not many people use it. And felt like a lot of investment for not a lot of return. Amber was quite good at following up and sharing with me data about the number of the uptake essentially of the systems. And I've been completely won over. So I think it's a good example of the way Amber ran her shop there in Denver, that if you push out some information that can convince the skeptics, and as we've said for many years, data it can help you, and don't think of it as harming you. I think Amber really embraced that very early on. It was great to see. So sure, the academics have been looking at vote by mail, I would say closely for about 2 decades. There's examples of states like Oregon that went full vote by mail. That was a point of a lot of research. There's been exploration of absentee balloting as well. I think what I would say as a broad overview is that if we look simply at no excuse absentees, there's a pretty consistent evidence over a long period of time that citizens who have a difficult time getting to the polling place for whatever reason, whether they're farther away, they may have transportation difficulties, their commuting patterns and their work lives may be such that it's difficult for them to get to a polling place for a limited period of time on a Tuesday. There's higher usage rates among those parts of the citizenry. The second thing I'll say is there were sort of 2 waves of research. I think this is fairly common in political science, where we first get attuned to a question. We look at it, there's kind of a first wave of conclusions. And then as the world changes, we continue to update what we know. So the first wave of research around 2004, 2005, the indications were that vote at home, vote by mail, was used by high propensity voters, people who tend to vote anyway, and they found it more convenient. So you could certainly go back and look for press statements and other events where I was at around 2006, 2007. I had a fairly routinized line, which is vote by mail, absentee voting is used by older, whiter, better educated, sort of high propensity voters. That really has changed in the last 10 years, I think, as vote by mail has become more common in many more states. And really at this point, the vote at home, vote by mail electorate really doesn't look that different. There's not evidence that it benefits one or the other party. A question I get all the time, I'll certainly be getting that again. There's not a lot of evidence that it benefits one. It really benefits campaigns, organizations that are better organized, like lots of campaign techniques. The last thing you asked was, what do we know about where the points of concern? And you raised some of these with Amber. And one of the points of concern that I will raise that I think academics could potentially partner with administrators who are moving in this direction is, are there particular populations that we may be concerned about? There's some evidence in some states, some of which you and I worked on, Charles, about 8 or 9 years ago, where Charles and I worked on a study examining ballot error rates. The term of art is the residual vote rate, but it's essentially the ballot has been returned to an election office, and for one or the other reasons, some of the markings on it are problematic. So we call that the residual vote rate. So we discovered that one of the highest residual vote rate precincts in Florida at that time was in a self-contained senior citizens home. And there was relatively higher rates of absentee ballot usage, as you would expect. And there were errors being made. And so that was an opportunity for us to reach out to election officials and say, hey, you may want to think about some of your design issues. Maybe you want to put some assistance at that location. People may be having some difficulties navigating your ballot. So I would say from the academic perspective, we really want to focus on not just the electorate as a whole, but some of these subgroups, subpopulations that may, for whatever reasons, have particular difficulties if we move rapidly to a new system, as appears to be happening in Wisconsin and maybe happening in many states.
So to follow up on another common question you probably get, and that has to do with turnout. I'm sure you get a lot of questions about the effect of voting by mail on turnout. That's something that's probably changed over time as well. And I mean, certainly the current circumstances might just be so sui generis that it's kind of irrelevant. But can you say a little bit about what political science has found about turnout and how that might have changed over time?
Absolutely. So again, I want to refer back to something that Amber said that I really want to hammer home, that at this particular point, when the world is changing rapidly, some of the standard, both election administrator ways of thinking about things, but also the scholarly ways, may be under stress, as many of us are. But I do believe that for local administrators, state officials, they could find academic partners. They may be able to help them work through some of the data and help to develop some of the models that Amber referred to. That's our bread and butter. And I know a lot of election officials are highly stressed right now. The Vote at Home Institute can help you find partners as well to help think about developing some of those models under these new systems. So, our conclusion at this point, I think the consensus, not everyone, not every study, but across many studies, there's a small but significant bump in turnout when you put in place no excuse absentee balloting. That'll be 2 to 4% typically related with that reform. It will be higher if you go full vote by mail, as Oregon and Washington and Colorado have done, and now Utah and Hawaii. That's fairly typical. You know, people have these expectations that the vote reforms are going to be these massive changes, 10, 15, 20%. That's not really what drives turnout. Charles, as you're well aware, Amber is familiar with this as well. Really what drives turnout is voter interest, voter excitement. This is going to be a high turnout election in 2020. We know that. I expect if vote at home gets put in place in more states, we're not going to find a major bump. What I've been thinking through is what will happen if some of the 17 states that don't have no excuse absentee voting go that way after this election. I think it's actually going to be the 2021 or 2022 elections where we'll see the big change for two reasons. First, because voters and campaigns and others will kind of adapt to this new method. They'll mobilize in new ways. And, you know, voters may simply like it. That, you know, there's something about you're in one of these states, you get your ballot at home, and it's sort of very convenient. You have time to think about it. You have time to reflect upon your voting decisions. So I think where we're going to see the big changes here is going to be after 2020. I think, as you already said, Charles, 2020 is it's rapid adaptation, both for the scholars and the administrators. And I just urge everyone listening to seek out partnerships. I think that's how we're going to help one another.
Yeah, so why don't we end with that and get both of your reflections on precisely the point that Paul was making. Is what people who know me have heard me talk about. This is the farmer and the cowman moment when academics and election administrators don't always get along with each other for a variety of reasons. But MEDSL and other groups should try to bridge that gap. I think the two of you are a really great example of academics and election practitioners working together whenever they can. Can both of you kind of reflect on what that's been like, and from your perspective, what's the best way to make that relationship work in working with the other side? Either of you can go first. How about Amber? I'll be the trash.
Sure. Well, I think, I mean, first off, I kind of embrace any help from the academic community on these sorts of analysis, because honestly, in most of the counties and jurisdictions, they don't have the expertise on staff to do a lot of data analysis. And so I think that the partnership opportunities that exist with the academic community to do some of these things, and you know, we did what we could in Denver, but I know Neil, for instance, has done a lot of partnerships out in Orange County on different aspects of this, and it's really critical to make that happen. So don't be afraid of academics and research, but actually embrace it and have them, you know, they can help you improve your operations and improve things overall. And so I'm a huge proponent. I could be a commercial for MEDSL on doing more outreach.
That'll be another recording.
Yeah, with this background. I encourage all election officials to really embrace academics on this.
Yeah, I would say with full disclosure, you know, I was honored to be part of Amber's national circle of advisors. I'm also on the MEDSL board. The MEDSL board includes election administrators. Amber's circle includes administrators and academics. Feel comfortable reaching out through someone like Amber as an administrator. You feel that she's part of your community. That's a great way to go. People are welcome to contact me. I can connect you with other election administrators nationally or out west who have worked successfully with academics. I think that Charles and I and Barry Burden, Michael McDonald, Donna Atkinson, many, you know, it's sort of our responsibility, I think, to work with the academics. And that's where I try to take a role to help the academics understand really the vulnerabilities that election officials are facing, many of whom are elected themselves or could lose their jobs if information comes out. You know, these things happen, don't they? So listen, I just want to say there's lots of leadership out there in all of our communities, and I like the way Amber phrased it. Think of academics as your supporters and data as a shield. And just try to be innovative because I think we can help.
Great. Thanks, Paul. And thanks, Amber. I promised the viewers that this would be brief, and so we'll end this here, but there's a lot more to be said, and I hope we can say more in the coming weeks.
Hi, kids. Good to see you. Bye-bye.
Thank you both for joining us today, and thanks for all of you who are out there watching. We'll have links in the description below if you'd like to learn more about Amber or Paul's work or their organizations. If you'd like to know when the next video is going to go live, go ahead and subscribe to this channel. In the meantime, if you have questions about the MIT Election Lab, COVID-19, or elections, just follow the links in the description below. Until next time, stay safe out there.